My name is Emily Scott, and I'm the Stakeholder Relations Officer here at the Douglas Caldwell-Layton Foundation, and I will be your host today. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home, and hope you reflect upon the land that you are located on. I bring greetings to all of you on behalf of our board of directors and staff here at Tommy Douglas's charity. The Douglas Caldwell-Layton Foundation for Social Democracy is pleased to be hosting the Women's Leadership Showcase. Throughout this series, we'll be interviewing different social democratic women leaders from across the country in hopes of invoking discussion about how to make more space for women leaders in their careers and in their local communities. I would also like to thank our valued union partners who share our vision, values, and allow us to educate people from all walks of life through these events and activities. Thank you to the United Steelworkers, UFCW Canada, PIPS, AMAPSIO, IBEW, AWECTA, and Liona Local 1611. We are grateful to be joined by the incredible Melissa Bruno and Marit Stiles today, both inspiring women leaders in their own right. Melissa worked for SHAD Canada, a Canadian charity and STEAM program, developing their community engagement and partnership growth strategy. Melissa has worked in progressive politics, including serving several elected officials and 2 federal NDP leaders, Jack Layton and Jagmeet Singh, and serving as the National Director of Canada's NDP. Melissa is a founding member of Canada's first professional association for working mothers and a partnerships co-chair with the Public Affairs Association of Canada. Melissa is now a government relations principal at Ernst Swift Strategies and a new member of our board of directors. So welcome aboard. Marit Stiles is the leader of the official opposition in Ontario and has represented the riding of Davenport since 2018. Prior to becoming an MPP, Marit fought for Canada's art and cultural sector as the National Director of Public Policy for Research for ACTRA, the Actors Union. Marit became a passionate advocate for local public schools as a parent, eventually running and winning a seat as a school trustee from 2014 to 2018. Marit is an organizer at heart, making her a strong, empathetic leader who can get things done. So for all of those joining today, here's how the event will unfold. It is a webinar event, so only the panelists will be able to speak during the event. But if you do have a question, we do encourage you to use the Q&A feature, and we will do our best to get to you. We are in a bit of a time crunch, but we will do our best. And I apologize if we do not get to your question by the end. We do hope you enjoy this conversation, and without further ado, I will hand it off to Melissa to get started with today's conversation. So I hope you enjoy.
Thank you so much. And just before we get started, I have a little fun fact. So Marit was also the president of the federal NDP before becoming an MPP in 2018. And so her and I actually got to work together for a short period of time when I was in Ottawa. So I can confirm she is in fact a very strong leader that makes things happen.
That was a long time ago now, it seems like, Melissa, but here we are.
I know. Okay, so let's get to it.
Yeah.
Marit, you grew up in Newfoundland and moved to Ontario for school, I believe. Can you share a little bit about what your upbringing was like in Newfoundland and any lessons or principles that you've carried with you into your adult life?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, thanks so much for having me here today. I'm super excited about it. It's great. I'm actually joining from Ottawa. I'm in my parents' condo in Ottawa Vanier after I just spent, I think, 3 hours or something in the sweltering heat canvassing for a really great candidate we have in a provincial by-election in Canada Carleton named Melissa Conrad. I will definitely mention her name many times today, but but it's nice and air conditioned in here. But my parents live in Ottawa now. But yeah, I was born and raised in Newfoundland, just outside St. John's, in the communities of Long Pond and then later Logie Bay. And my family, my parents were Americans. They came here in the 60s to Newfoundland. My dad was doing some research, school-related research. But the Vietnam War was underway down there, and a lot of his neighbors, some of the people he'd grown up with, had gone off, and he knew it was a matter of time. And he and my mom decided they didn't want to be around for that, and they were conscientious objectors. So they left and came to Newfoundland and had me and stayed and became Canadian citizens. And we had a small farm for most of that time, raising goats and chickens and ducks and a few pigs occasionally and things like that, and growing vegetables, which was not easy at the time in Newfoundland, I can tell you. So we did a little of our own farming, and I grew up with that, I guess, responsibility that you have if you grow up on a farm or a small farm. And you asked me what I learned from that. And I think growing up in Newfoundland, I mean, obviously it's a beautiful place. It's true. But there's a sense that, the people who are the ones who work with the resources, being the fishery, for example, are the people who are the closest to it and rely on it the most. Often governments don't listen to them. And we've seen the results of that in, the shutdown of the fishery over the years. We've seen what climate change means, and what happens when you're not taking care of those resources and taking care of your environment and those finite resources. And I think that's something I think a lot about in my current role, and particularly right now in Ontario, and looking at how the current government wants to sort of exploit so many of our resources. And I think it's really important that we be good caretakers of our planet and our communities. And I would say the other thing I think I've learned a lot from growing up in Newfoundland was the importance of storytelling, a good story, and being able to laugh and enjoy life, especially when I think, things sometimes are stressful. So I think I've learned a lot about that. But my parents, definitely, their sort of roots in the United States at that time, the civil rights movement, and their connection to environmental protection and stuff had a huge impact on me.
So just picking up on sort of some movements that you mentioned, you yourself have had pretty impressive leadership roles within the labor movement with USW, with ACTRA. You were a school board trustee. Now you're the leader of the Ontario NDP. Can you talk a little bit about some of the role models that you've had, whether those have been, women in your life, in your family, your friend network, that have really shaped you and what they have meant to you?
Thanks for that. It's interesting because, and I know, this is going to sound like such a politician response, but I really do find a lot of people inspiring, actually. I'm almost always, if I go canvassing door to door and I talk to somebody and I'm listening to somebody's story, I'm often inspired by what people are doing out there in their just daily lives and their daily struggles. And there's so many extraordinary leaders, in our communities at all levels, in all respects. From the person who stands up to help, get more picnic tables in the community park, to some of the people I've had the pleasure of working with. And, I think in politics, I had the real pleasure, and my first job out of university was in the NDP government as a very junior assistant to a very new MPP who'd been just elected in Timmins, named Gilles Bisson, who went on to be, I think, one of the longest sitting members in the legislature. And he was a great, I certainly look up to him, but it also meant that I had a chance to work with, and I saw the work of extraordinary ministers and MPPs in the NDP government days, like Francis Lincoln and Marion Boyd and Marilyn Turley and so many more. And so they've all been very, I consider them to be mentors to me. Folks like Peggy Nash and Olivia Chow, Mayor-elect Olivia Chow, have always been, so it's extraordinary to me how much, if you just ask somebody for their time to have a coffee or give advice, how open they are to doing that. And women like Peggy and Olivia and others have really, given me time over the years, which I appreciate. But I think the folks who have really, it mentored me and I look up to and are in leadership are my mother, particularly, who is, was always a leader, always the person who, if something needed to get done, she would roll up her sleeves and get it done. And I think my parents both taught us to be active, to advocate. They weren't partisan people. They were never very involved in partisan politics, but, they thought it was important that we stand up and that we also, learned early on that we had to stand up for other people and protect other people who were more vulnerable. So that was really important. But I'm also going to say, I think there's something to be said for siblings, because my younger sister is a very driven, competitive person, super smart, and has succeeded in keeping me on my toes, trying to keep up with her for as long as I can remember. So I have to give her some credit too. But, I do think, at ACTRA, Fern Downey, longtime national president, is a dear friend. But I really do find that I'm inspired all the time by so many women that I meet, so many people that I meet, and I'm like on the daily, I find new people to get excited about.
I can definitely relate. A little bit of sibling rivalry is never a bad thing.
Yeah.
You sort of touched on this a little bit, but in terms of sort of you obviously have a very strong sense of community and justice, like that is evident in just talking to you for even like 30 seconds. Can you maybe share a little bit more about how that strong sense of community and justice came to be? Like you mentioned some of the learnings from your parents, but anything specific that popped out of you in terms of a life lesson?
Mhm. Well, I mean, like I said, I didn't have a partisan upbringing, but there was a strong sense of, especially my parents coming out of the United States in the 60s with that, the civil rights movement. And it was a very big part of my upbringing. I think when I was a young person in high school, my parents had this opportunity to move to Southern Africa, and they ended up being there for about 20 years doing sort of development work. But it connected me to the whole international solidarity movement and anti-apartheid. And that was a really important thing, because when I moved to Toronto and came to Ottawa originally and then moved to Toronto, it was those folks. It was that realization that here I am, I'm coming into these big cities. I don't know anybody basically, but who are the people around me that I relate to? Where can I find that connection? And it was through, international solidarity work. It was at the rallies and the, amnesty meetings, or eventually the NDP and the NDP riding associations, which for me was like the best way that I could create this network, which I knew I needed. I think most people do, but I certainly felt like I needed those friends, that contact, that sort of family, especially living, coming to a very big city. And so I think, being able to take a lot of the lessons I learned in that international solidarity work to the very local issues in my community was really, really important, and has really defined how I approach politics. And so it's been a big thing for me. I think when I look back, there's a number of examples that kind of speak to how I got into politics, because I was not the candidate. I was behind the scenes working on, campaigns, volunteering, in the great riding of Davenport, mostly, sometimes traveling around to other campaigns around the country, but didn't really ever see myself stepping forward as a candidate for a long time.
So what was the turning point for you? Like, what was it that made you decide that you wanted to run as an MPP? And then what was it that made you decide you wanted to run as leader of the Ontario NDP?
Well, I think it was in 2011 when we elected that amazing official opposition, in Canada, the first NDP official opposition federally. And suddenly every media outlet needed a New Democrat on a panel. Go figure. So it was Kathleen Monk, who I didn't know really at the time, but I had been helping out our MP, newly elected MP at the time, Andrew Cash. And somebody had said to her, you know, this woman, she's might know how to speak to people. She might be okay. So I don't know how I ended up doing it, but I ended up doing a lot of punditry in those years. Some of the people watching will remember that probably. And I found that easy. You know, I will say I've always, and I often, you know, I make a point of talking about this with young people, especially students, young New Democrats, because I think it's important to know that, you know, many people don't just wake up and become like somebody who can speak publicly or speak into media, that this is something you learn, and that it's actually okay to be nervous. I would have considered myself actually a bit of an introvert, very shy, didn't really like to speak in public at all. Certainly no speeches. And but doing media work, really, I realized I could come up with a message. I could communicate effectively. And I just started to try to challenge myself to be at the forefront a little bit more. And, you know, but again, being a candidate had not really entered the realm of possibility for me. It was something I imagined. And it was really a very local issue in my riding that got me interested in running for the first time. And that was actually a big property owned by the school board. And I was a parent with 2 young kids at the time. And the school board was under pressure from the Liberal provincial government to sell off this giant chunk of land for, you know, to developers. And I was aware of the need even then that we had to address housing and homelessness and the lack of affordable housing in our communities. And it was a really real issue. So I wasn't opposed to it, but I was so upset with the way that the school board was managing it and our local representatives. I felt like we were missing a real opportunity to, you know, leverage this into an opportunity to get community benefit and truly affordable housing, and, you know, maybe even have a better school building for the kids that were going to grow up in these condos. And so I went to a bunch of public meetings and thought, like, gosh, this we could do so much better. And that was why I decided to run for school board trustee. And then I kind of, you know, as always happens, you start out very local, and not always, but you often realize, okay, yeah, actually the solutions to this are all at the provincial level.
Mhm.
And I decided to run provincially. And yeah, and, you know, so I've been doing that for a little while. And I think, you know, the question of why I decided to run for the leadership is really the question of the outcome of the last election here in Ontario. Because, you know, obviously we were able to form official opposition again here, but we didn't have the outcome we wanted. In other words, we still had a forward conservative majority government, and the turnout was so low, right? Melissa, it was like a historically low voter turnout. And that really stuck with me, that fact. You know, how do we start to, you know, how do we inspire people to get out and vote for something, not just against something, but also for something? And so when our leader at the time, of course, you know, Andrea, who'd done so much for our party and our movement, decided not, you know, to step down, it was for me a real moment when I had to think about whether or not I had the answers to those questions, or whether I wanted to try to find the answers to those questions. So yeah, it was a big step.
You know, one of the things in the series that we're talking about is ensuring that there's, you know, room for women to use their voice, ensuring that those voices are heard. You know, you yourself, as you mentioned in sort of the education conversation, like you as the critic stood up for education assistants who, you know, again, predominantly women, getting incredibly low wages. Like we're seeing very similar trends in healthcare. That's leading to labor shortages. Can you talk a little bit about what you've sort of witnessed and experienced in terms of burnout that a lot of women are facing? And what do you think are some more supports that we can provide to them?
Yeah, well, and I think, and I can't speak for every other part of this country, obviously, but I mean, certainly here in Ontario, the crisis that we're seeing in healthcare, the crisis that we're seeing in education, these are human resource crises, right? And there are solutions, and it is not, it's not coincidental by any means that it is female dominated professions like healthcare and education where we're seeing workers struggling the most with poor wages and working conditions. And in Ontario, again, we've got a government that is actually actively working to make life harder for those healthcare workers, for those education workers, again, mostly women, and particularly racialized women. And so, yes, we are seeing burnout. We are seeing, people who have more experience in years, who are maybe not quite at retirement, but could take early retirement, making that choice because the pressure, the underfunding, the lack of support, the disrespect is so intense. I've heard nurses when I've met with them, and I really have been listening to a lot of nurses lately, and they'll talk about the moral distress that they feel in not being able to do the job the way they know it needs to be done, and treat the patients the way they know they need to be treated. And then also not being able to spend the time that they know they need to mentor those younger nurses, and to actually, because it isn't something you just graduate from school and come into and know everything. It takes time. It's a long process. And we are seeing a healthcare system in crisis because of that. And we are also seeing them leave and go into working for temporary agencies, which can provide, more flexible hours, better wages. At the end of the day, that's also, a toll on the system. It's literally costing 10, 20, 100 times more to our hospitals, to our healthcare system. So it's a terrible, terrible path that we're on here. And it's one of the key challenges and fights that we are involved in right now in the Ontario NDP here as official opposition in Ontario. And that's the fight against this terrible Bill 124, which attempted to freeze all of those public sector workers' wages. And like you said, I mean, many of those are healthcare, education, most of them are women. And we've been fighting that since day one. We'll continue to fight it. But this is a crisis that doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's a crisis of the Conservatives making. Mm-hmm. There's intention behind this, and you see it here in Ontario with the legislation that's now allowing for this proliferation of private for-profit healthcare in the province, the complete undermining and undercutting of our public healthcare system. It's scary. It's going to cost us more. It's going to lead to worse patient outcomes. I don't have to tell the people watching this that. I think we all know that. But at the end of the day, that burnout, what's happening to workers that I see in healthcare and education, again, mostly, is not unintentional. I think we need to understand that it didn't have to be this way. The pandemic didn't help things. No question, but we have governments, liberal and conservative across this country, that are making a choice, and they are choosing not to spend healthcare dollars, education dollars to support those workers. And that choice is eroding our public healthcare and education systems, and it's opening the door to for-profit options.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there is a wide consensus that people understand that we need women in positions of power. We need them in leadership roles, whether that's in business, in non-government organizations. I think there's organizations devoted to getting more women in politics. Do you think there's anything else that we can be doing as a collective to make more space for women leaders, especially in politics?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to start with the very simple. Yes, there absolutely is. Of course, like we are not seeing it. I will start by saying, never underestimate the importance of just asking someone. I think I was in politics for many, many years before somebody said, would you be a candidate? And never even occurred to me. I meet people all the time. Nobody's ever asked them. So asking is a good first step, but just know what that means for them.
How many times were you asked? Do you remember?
Hardly. I don't even know. I think, I tell you what, I will give the credit to the great writing of Sarnia, who, when I went out there to organize in 1995, never forgot me and kept asking me to run. And I'd say, "You've got to be kidding. We can't find somebody better." But anyways, but I will say, you have to ask, first of all. And the other thing is, in political organizing, we always talk about, helping people level up. And it's important to recognize that people, women, particularly Indigenous, Black, racialized women, gender diverse people, face many higher barriers to opportunities. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to offer mentorship and leadership opportunities across all those political, business, NGO spaces. We need to also hold space so that people can grow and recognize their potential. I've heard so many times people say, well, we hired that person and then it didn't work out. And I always say, well, did you offer them the supports they need? Did you listen to what they were looking for? It's not enough. And we have a MPP in our caucus who's had to resign her seat because she's a single parent of 3 children. And childcare is not something you could expense as a member of provincial parliament. And while some may argue, well, you could afford childcare, etc., when you have to leave home for most of a week to be away from your children and you don't have a family to support you there, this is a real problem. We haven't figured out a solution to that yet. Not really. It's not easy. And so, we also need to be realistic and listen and understand what people's needs are to be able to step into those kinds of roles and opportunities. And we have to do it. It's absolutely essential.
One of the things that strike me is, around a lot of the negative vitriol that we see online. I think it's dramatically worse for people who don't identify as a white man. As a woman in politics, obviously with a high profile, you have a significant following. Can you share how you yourself deal with some of that negativity online? Because I do feel like that is one of the many barriers that women talk about when they are approached to run for a political office. So, what's your sort of advice to those folks?
Yeah, it's terrible. And I mean, I think it's that vitriol that we see online is increasingly, spilling out, into communities, onto our streets. I think, in as women, we're kind of told it's in our genetic code to block out the bullshit, right? Excuse my language. But the truth is it's hard. We're human, and sometimes that stuff is very harsh. And unfortunately, as a society, we still exist within that sexism. And I want to, acknowledge too, of course, that, for Black, Indigenous, racialized, LGBTQ2S plus women and other gender diverse people, they experience it much worse than I do, I think. Absolutely, no question. So, the easy answer is you can say, don't pay attention to it, it's trolls. But the truth is, we all have to call it out, and we have to speak up, and we have to allow for no space for this. And we all have theories about why this is bubbling over. I think some of it is that some very powerful people have given voice to things that have been left unsaid for a long time, but we're looking under the surface. And so women like me and a lot of us need to step up and take on the haters and show that we will not be bullied. And I, saying that, I also want to acknowledge that, it is not a safe space right now for a lot of people. But look, it's not easy. I knew that taking on this role and what's happening out there is more important than being scared and going and hiding inside the comfy walls of my home, right? So again, we really do need to speak up. And we need to stand up against those bullies, and we need to be there for those who are, I think, experiencing it in a much greater way. And, that's why I think, showing up for Pride events this year has been so important. We certainly in our caucus, we all made it a priority to go to as many as we could, as many Pride events during the June Pride Month. And we'll continue to, because, this is not a time to be afraid. This is a time to stand up and stand with people who are really being targeted by a lot of hate.
Just picking up on that thread, I remember one of the first acts that you did as leader of the Ontario NDP was attending a drag show in Hamilton. And it was at a time where the LGBTQ community had been experiencing, an increased amount of hate. Can you share some of the sort of behind the scenes decision-making considerations that you and your team were talking about that ultimately led to you attending and prioritizing that event? Because I'm sure that, on that particular day, you probably had, 5 to 10 requests for your time.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, I will say that particular one, I was in Hamilton, and Kristen Wong Tam, who is one of our wonderful Ontario MPPs, and was themselves a city councillor for a long time in Toronto as well, and is one of our, we have a queer caucus now in the Ontario NDP official opposition, because we have a number of people who are 2S LGBTQ plus, folks. And it was Kristen who said, look, Marit, do you think we could find some time to go do this together? And, told me that there were going to be protesters there. And, I mean, obviously we as New Democrats, that we believe in promoting and encouraging equality and inclusivity. And it's, I think, at the core of social democracy, of who we are and who they are. And so it was really a very natural and simple decision to attend that, because of the rise in vitriol, because of the rise in hate against the trans and drag communities. And, I think it's really important that people in public office, people like me, use that power to show up, to be there, to stand with, even in those difficult moments, especially actually in those difficult moments. And the other thing for me is showing up, showing solidarity with the community, and building partnerships with different communities is really the core of organizing. We're not going to win progress in this province or anywhere across this country if we don't come together and listen to and acknowledge people's very real and lived experiences. And that means, again, showing up, listening, and being there.
If we, a lot of these principles kind of factor into what we understand to be, social democracy. People identify with the terms democratic socialism within our movement, but to sort of the general public, I feel like those terms get lost in translation. People don't necessarily know what they mean, or it's not resonating in the way that we all understand those terms. Can you talk a little bit about the principles of social democracy and why people might be supportive of those principles?
Yeah, well, I mean, social democratic principles are, investing in people to grow strong, caring communities, using the power of government to make sure that no one gets left behind. And, I find when I'm out there talking to Ontarians, for example, about what they're looking for, and a lot of them are looking for more opportunities, an economy that works for them, not against them, and an equitable shot at a good life, or these are things that are very much in line with a social democratic vision for the province, for Ontario, for Canada. And I think where we things go wrong sometimes is that there are a lot of misconceptions about social democracy that are, let's be clear, deliberately spun by right-wing defenders of the status quo. And, I think, look, I came out of, I graduated from high school in 87. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a major moment in my sort of young adulthood. And so for a lot of people of our generation, socialism and social democracy is often, connected to that, was a bad word. I think that this has really changed a lot. I think there's certainly new generations of folks that don't have the same hangups. I think that again, a lot of the things that we believe are the principles of what make us New Democrats and social democrats are at the heart of what most people in this province, in this country, are looking for. And so I think it's really just how we communicate it and connect to people on those issues. And I think it's really changing. I think we're seeing that in the United States, certainly with some recent elections, how young people have actually really changed the course of things. So I'm very hopeful that maybe the tide is shifting, but there's no question that there's also, an enormous and great divide and division.
No, I think you're right. I think I see it too, that the tide is shifting. And I think, we see political leaders in Canada and abroad talking about, investing in people at, or finding efficiencies. It's almost like you can only do one or the other. We talk obviously a lot as Democrats about investing in people. Can you share with folks what it means to you and what you mean when you say that we're going to invest in people, the Ontario NDP is going to invest in people?
Well, you can't trust or frankly expect the market to look after people, right? I think we believe that. We know there's a place in the market, but we know that ultimately you can't trust or expect the market to look after people. The market knows nothing but the bottom line, right? It's about it making profits. And sometimes that means also exploiting people to do so. And we're seeing this under this current government in Ontario, right? Healthcare workers, nurses, PSWs, leaving the workforce because their wages have been frozen, exhausted, burnt out, disrespected. A government that has not invested in people, not invested in the right things, that's inefficient, actually, it turns out. It's very inefficient. And, we really have to counter this. Look, we have a premier here who comes from the days of the Ford mayoral days. We'd like to all forget them, but, it's still very much hanging over our heads, the railing against the gravy train. The truth is they're terrible fiscal managers, right? They waste money on all kinds of things. And they're not investing in the things that really matter. And I do believe that, I'm always kind of debating how much of it is just they're not good at their jobs and they're not good managers, and how much of it is intentional. I think some of it is intentional. I think some of it is about undermining our public services because they ultimately want the private sector to take it over. But look, again, investing, it means investing in people, means recognizing the hard work that people are doing out there. And it means investing in people if we're going to build that stronger economy and that society that we all want. And I think it's very, very simple, actually.
Do you think if we did that, like I'm wondering if there's a connection here between sort of this right-wing rhetoric around finding efficiencies and the low voter turnout that we've been seeing in the last a couple of elections, frankly, at all levels of government. Like clearly the public sentiment is that people are fed up. They don't trust our public institutions anymore. They see the political division. And at the end of the day, they're left thinking, how is my life going to get better? So what do you think we need to do to reach people again? Like, how do we connect with these folks to start restoring that trust?
Yeah. Well, when at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about, why did I decide to run for leader? What was that moment? And I mentioned, the low voter turnout. And in the last provincial election, and certainly not something we've just seen here in Ontario or just at the provincial level, we're seeing this everywhere. And I really do believe, I mean, to your point, that the reason that a lot of people aren't voting anymore is because they've been told that their vote really doesn't make a difference, that no matter what they do, things kind of stay the same. And I truly believe that's because they're most of the time ending up with a liberal or a conservative government, where there really isn't an interest in shaking things up, in challenging the status quo, or they've, frankly, had their hearts broken. They voted liberal in 2015 and said, wow, they're really going to change the way we vote people in this country, or we're going to do all these big, exciting things. And then they lied to them. And we've seen it over and over again, government after government, just not fulfilling their promises, not living up to expectations, and the status quo just remains. And so I think that, for us as New Democrats, it's really, really important that we tackle that piece, that we give people something to believe in, and that these wins that we have are really important, because as we grow, as we show we can win, we can make gains, we can show that actually voting really matters. When I have this speech I've been giving for about 10 years now. Don't tell anybody, at high school graduations, where I always say, and I really believe it, which is, I ask them to do one really important thing, and that is to when they get the right to vote, if they aren't already able to, that they do use that their vote, that they get out and vote. I don't care who you vote for, just vote. But then I say, but here's the other thing I want you to do. I want you to hold people like me to a higher standard. Elected officials, elected people that get voted in, make big decisions that impact, your life. And people like you have things you care about. You care about the environment. You care about, whether you're going to have housing you can afford. All these things. People like me will get to make decisions about that. Hold us to a higher standard and hold us to account. And I think that message is really important, until we have an electoral system, which I believe we will one day, and we should, that is more reflective, allows us to have a government that's more reflective of the people of this country and this province. We have to show people and explain to people that their vote does matter. And we have to put forward some ideas that are going to inspire them to believe that, things could be actually quite different. And, while I have a chance, can I just say the greatest example in quite a while now here in this part of Canada, of the rejection of the status quo has got to be the election of Olivia Chow as mayor of the city of Toronto, because, there's lots of theorizing about what happened there, but we know as New Democrats that it was years and years of organizing. Folks like Progress Toronto, that have been putting in the time to connect with people about the issues and listen to people about what really matters to them. And what I'm hearing is, when I go to places like Scarborough, where they very overwhelmingly elected Olivia Chow, much to the surprise of the Liberals and the Conservatives, but people there are saying, like they're feeling pretty empowered right now. So when I talk about wins, that's a good example. You did it. Your vote really mattered. It made a huge difference. We've got to remind people that it makes a difference every day, every time.
Yeah, no, totally. Just talking about wins, or sort of on the thread of wins, what would you say are some of your highlights or moments that you're most proud of?
Oh, well, I think I have to say, I believe it, the leadership here. It wasn't the leadership race that I was expecting, I will say. I certainly thought we would have a contested leadership race and it would be, go on for a lot longer than it did. As it happened, I was the only person to in the end put together the full package to qualify, and I'm proud of it because we ran a very strong campaign from day one. We were out to, set the agenda, and we did it. And, we did it at, like a lot of campaigns, on a bit of a shoestring. And I got to go around a lot of the province and connect with a lot of New Democrats and others. And it was really, really exciting. I think the other big win, obviously, like there's been some pretty great elections that we've all been part of over the years. I remember 2011 very, very well. And in our riding, Melissa, you were in that riding then too, of course. I think you were, right? Did you live there then?
I
Yeah.
was, yeah.
So in Davenport, we'd had a liberal. It was just one of the safest liberal ridings in the country. And Charles Katja had been the MP for over 40 years, and then, forever. And then Mario Silva was elected, and then but the election of Andrew Cash, even though we did have a bit of an orange wave hit, we were working on that for 2 years. We had a election campaign officer, I think almost about a year and a half beforehand. And I'm really proud of that kind of work, because I know what it takes to organize on the ground, to build a riding association, to do all of those things, that, to knock on the doors. And that's why I really believe in our party, as well, because I really believe in those riding associations, and the work of, so much of the work that happens is always volunteer. It always is,
Yeah.
and it always will be. And to really never take for granted what people devote in their lives, it's pretty extraordinary.
What about, obviously we're always, as a collective, looking to learn and to grow. What about moments that you've learned the most from on your sort of political activist journey?
Yeah. There's certainly, I think you learn from your mistakes, right? Often, I know we always say that, but it's a really good point, right? You learn from your mistakes. You learn, I had many experiences, as a school board trustee, where, I realized we hadn't really organized well enough around a particular issue, where we lost some votes. But what do you do then is you brush yourself off, and you get back up, and you figure out how you're going to win the next one. And I think that's often the case, right? Learning from those times when you stumble. And I've certainly had a number of those. I worked in an environment at one point where I supported a lot of women who were running for leadership positions. And I kind of took it for granted that, when it was my time to become, to take that step, that everybody would be super supportive. But it doesn't always work out like that. You have to accept that sometimes that, people are going to disappoint you as well. And I always say to people, just remember that women have been told to wait for your turn for so long. Just
We're done waiting.
You're done waiting. There's, people, and this is something that also really gets me. There's a lot of people always say, you don't want to seem, as a young woman, I was often told, like, don't seem too competitive. You don't want to seem like, that's kind of that's not very appealing. Well, I'd say no to that, right? Like, be whoever you are. And if that's, competitive, be competitive. You want to win. Winning is better than losing. Win. Focus. You don't have to hide that part of yourself. And I have two young daughters at home. Well, they're now adults, but they're young adults, and I'm constantly telling them to just go after what they want with confidence. And we're in a pretty privileged position for sure. But I do think it's a message that we need to get out there for sure.
Is there anything that you would say to either your own daughters or women across the country to sort of inspire them to take on leadership roles, whether that's in their community or in their careers? I think a lot of women, and you kind of touched on this, talk about they doubt themselves, they doubt their capabilities, they kind of suffer from imposter syndrome. They're looking to somebody else to kind of step up and do the leadership things. They don't believe that they can do that themselves. Any advice that you would give to folks like that?
Well, look to the women, again, who inspire you, the trailblazers. We think in our party, it's folks like Alexa McDonough or Rosemary Brown. These are people who had other things going on in their lives too. Some of them had privilege, some didn't, but they found a way forward. Find the thing that that really inspires you to want to change the world. There's always something, whether it's your local community and in that issue, or making public health care stronger, whatever it is, find that thing and really concentrate it. But I would say the other thing is, create that network of people around you. You're never going to do this on your own. Nobody ever has. Sometimes it's your family and your friends. Sometimes it's the people you meet in your work. Sometimes you have to create it yourself. You have to go out and find the people, and never be afraid to ask somebody who you admire, or you're curious about, to take the time to chat with you for a few minutes. I know personally myself, and I've always found that nobody's ever turned me down. And I try not to myself, because we want to support that next generation, the future leaders, and I think it's really, really important to do that. It wasn't that long ago, and I'm sure many of the people watching today will know. Your mother, my grandmothers. There's no question that they would have never imagined ever that somebody in their family would be elected to the office, period. The things that they struggled with are not the struggles that I've experienced, for sure. But whether it's you and you're the first in your family of your generation to do something big, or it's your daughters, or it was your grandmother, we all have to step up, I think, at some point. And also, the other thing, can I just say, is you don't have to be the candidate either, right? Every little thing we do, whether it's knocking on doors or putting a petition together, or speaking up at a school board meeting, or whatever you do, you're contributing, right? And you're building, and you're making those connections, and you're organizing, because organizing is just about conversations and then following through on them. And I think I just want to tell everybody that's listening today that despite all those barriers and those roadblocks that still exist for so many to achieve what they want to achieve today, it is possible to grab your dreams by the horns. You look again at somebody like Alexa, and you're reminded that was just a few decades ago, and we should take solace in that.
What a beautiful way to end our time today. Thank you so much, Marit. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to have this discussion with you and all of the people watching, and I will throw it back over to Emily.
Thank you. Thank you again to Melissa and Marit for that informative, inspiring discussion. We really appreciate you taking the time and are so grateful for your contributions to social democracy and our growing charity. I myself gained a lot of valuable insights, and there was a lot that resonated, especially being told to be quiet as a woman, or turning to other strong women in your life. So I'm leaving feeling inspired, and I hope everyone at home is leaving feeling inspired. And I appreciate you all tuning in. This series is tied to the Alexa McDonough Women's Leadership Center, which is a live-in repository for stories of success and triumph of the women who have fought so hard for many decades, and those who continue to fight for justice and social democracy today in honor of Alexa. It is our goal to continue her legacy by continuing to make space for other women to be leaders and educate others on the value of social democracy. Thank you to our supporters at the board and staff who joined us. We could not do this work without your trust in us. And a special thank you to all of our generous union partners for their support: the United Steelworkers, UFCW Canada, PIPS, AMAPCO, IBEW, OECTA, and LIUNA Local 1611. If you enjoyed this conversation and saw it as valuable, if you believe in the work we do as Tommy Douglas and our founders had, and believe that what we push for, advancing social democracy and making more inclusive spaces, please consider becoming a member and donating to the organization. We are a membership-driven organization, so we do rely on donations to carry out these events and connect with people. about the importance of social democracy. So please consider making a contribution, as a little bit goes a long way. And if you're interested in watching this again, we will be posting a recording of it on our YouTube, and we'll let you know when that's up. So thank you again for supporting the organization and showing up today. We hope that you will join us for our next interview, which is with Rachel Notley towards the end of the summer. So we wish you all a lovely evening. Take care and good night, folks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.